fire season arrived in force in 2020. It would be easy to think that it was something new, but fires have burnt the landscape that we call California since long before humans ever stepped foot here. It's estimated that when Europeans arrived, an average of 4 to 8 million acres burnt here every year. A century later, their impact reduced annual burn area by more than 95%. But recent years have taught a painful message. Fire won't be contained forever. So what changed? And why do fires seem to be getting worse in the American West?
The truth is, Native people were prevented from using fire in their traditional ways.
50 years after the big blow-up, the Forest Service seems to have more or less completed its task, not discriminating between good and bad fires, but just blanket suppression of all of them.
I'd say that since about 2013, we saw bigger fires. I think it's really become obvious to a lot of people.
We can't rely only on suppression 3 months of the year. We have to think about fire year-round, and we have to think about where we're putting our houses.
Ultimately, fire is going to be a process within the landscape. It's always there, it's always been there, and it's always going to be there.
As long as people have lived on the west coast of North America, they've lived with fire.
For millennia, people were stewarding the landscape with fire.
They, over a period of 10,000 years, developed these very sophisticated, what we would call fire management systems.
As we think about early Spanish colonizers coming into California, going on into the American period, we start to see the unraveling of this interrelated process of indigenous people setting fires within the landscapes and the way that the landscape was shaped with that fire.
The truth is, Native people were prevented from using fire in their traditional ways.
Settlers sought to reshape the landscape and brought with them a European philosophy rooted in dominance over nature. To feed growing populations, farms and ranches replaced grasslands and forests. Lumber was a valuable commodity with which to build boom towns and budding cities.
Some of the world's oldest, biggest, and tallest trees, living and growing a few days before, are now on their way to be sawn into lumber.
At the time, there was a debate of, do we continue the light burning like the tribes, or do we suppress fire to protect our national economic interest? And you can see which one the arguments won.
Burning forests simply didn't align with the wants of a growing society. This decision to exclude fire would have enormous impact.
A frame of reference that we have today is a lot different than how the same place was 100 years ago or 150 years ago, prior to fire exclusion and suppression and removal of Native people as stewards and caring for that place.
Federal land management agencies formed in the early 20th century, among them the U.S. Forest Service. Its founding mission? To provide quality water and timber for the nation's benefit.
We began creating a national infrastructure to manage fire.
The Forest Service, headquartered in Missoula, Montana.
Forest Service didn't have the resources to do it. That changes with the New Deal, and suddenly they've got all the resources they could want. Then it gets militarized during World War II.
Missoula to 8419.
Dump my load, heading home. Over.
By mid-century, the American approach to fire was clear. Command and control.
Only you.
Soon, Smokey Bear emerged as the cuddly but stern voice of care for our nation's forests.
Well, remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
The public policy and messaging were astonishingly successful.
Anyone who handles fire in any form is a potential killer.
Suppression efforts reduced wildland fire in California by as much as 95%. This reduction in fire coincided with a boom in residential development and the increasing habit of building homes on land that was meant to burn. Average temperatures throughout the American West have risen more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last century, with California and Alaska facing the greatest increases.
A lot of what we thought was going to happen has happened, unfortunately.
Probably since about 2013, we saw bigger fires, and not only did we see the fires, but we saw the amount of severity associated with those fires.
The severity of recent fire seasons has, in part, been linked to the intense drought of 2012 to 2018. Hotter and drier conditions that are becoming increasingly common thanks to human impacts on climate. CAL FIRE, California's state agency responsible for managing wildfire, has made the connection clear. They estimate that in some parts of the state, fire season has increased by 75 days. A warmer climate means bigger fires. Do bigger fires mean a warmer climate?
Yeah, the fires can be important relative to the emissions if you're right near the fire, but they don't add up to very much globally. It's really hard to wrap your head around just how much carbon we're emitting by fossil fuel burning. We have fires going on in our gas tanks and our furnaces that utterly dwarf what's going on in those wildfires.
The whole package for wildland firefighting comes together in 1910. That same month, a controversy boils up in California, which says Forest Service approach is misguided, and we should be emulating the American Indian and regularly burning. They said, if you keep fires out, we will have overgrown forests, we'll have sick and unhealthy forests, diseases, insects will come in, and we'll have uncontrollable fires. So, they more or less called it.
A century later, America's overzealous suppression tactics have fundamentally reshaped our forests. Increased density and the buildup of brush on forest floors, combined with a warming climate, have given birth to the mega fires we're seeing today.
It's politicized and polarized. Do we need to hand out rakes or do we need to shut down coal plants? They're both right and both wrong. Yeah, climate change is acting on a lot of pre-existing conditions, but if we had the forests we have today, but we still had the climate we had in 1960, we wouldn't be having these uncontrollable fires.
I packed all my animals up, I packed up my computer, and then I just kind of stood there and looked at everything. What do you grab when you're looking at everything possibly for the last time?
California, it's got a nature that's going to burn and burn big, and it's got a society that's determined to live where and when it wants to, and then it's relied on firefighting to stand between those two and buffer it. And I think what we're seeing now is the end of that assumption.
I found out on that following Tuesday that my house was gone. The entire neighborhood was absolutely obliterated.
What I've seen over the years is the personal impacts, people who lost loved ones and homes. And when those counties experience really large fires, it turns people away and it affects them in a negative way economically.
As fire risk in residential areas continues to rise, so too does the cost of protecting them. And it's not just taxpayer dollars, it's costing lives.
The weight of these fires is falling directly on the backs of seasonal employees who aren't being compensated fairly for what they're doing. We're heroes like 1 month out of the year, and then the rest of the year we're kind of forgotten about.
These are fires that happen in more developed areas where homes are burning, and it's homes that are the fuel. We have so many communities in the western U.S. on a hazardous landscape, and they're built in a vulnerable way.
It's more about the built environment around my property that is compatible with the climate I live in, which is fire-prone.
We think we can exist in the natural world on the edges of these wild spaces and then not actually have any accountability to those spaces, but in reality, we really need to have a stronger relationship with the places that we live. We can't rely only on suppression 3 months of the year. We have to think about fire year-round, and we have to think about where we're putting our houses.
After years of aggressive fire suppression, every Forest Service employee needs to understand why prescribed fire is now becoming our most effective management tool in restoring and maintaining healthy and productive watersheds and forests.
In the wake of all those fires that we had in September, national media outlets across the country were like, we know how to solve this problem, and it's prescribed fire. Well, in reality, it's not just prescribed fire, because prescribed fire isn't working for us right now in the capacity that we're doing it in, and we're not doing enough of it. So yeah, we need more of it, absolutely, but we also need to completely change the way we think about it.
California evolved with a very specific type of fire, and that was that fire that was shaped by indigenous people. Each burn was done at a scale that's a lot finer detailed, from like an individual plant to maybe a few hundred acres, versus something that's burning a lot larger area of the landscape that is consuming almost all the vegetation in its path.
Fire is medicine, and I have a spiritual and cultural obligation to fulfill fire, and I tried to burn as a private landowner. This year, you needed to have 12 firefighter type 2 personnel, burn boss type 2, an additional fire engine, and then some additional water support. And I'm trying to burn off less than an acre.
One of my fears and concerns is that if we really scale up prescribed burning across the state, we may be missing the mark in terms of how California's landscapes evolved to shape it in a different way. And so are we gaining anything different out of it? Are we stewarding our biodiversity? Are we getting the same ecosystem services as was, traditionally part of that system going back for millennia?
We don't even have a good narrative. We have great narratives about firefighting and fire as disaster, but is Hollywood going to make an action film about prescribed burning?
The narrative is at times vexing. 100 years ago, we decided to keep fire out. After that didn't work, we decided to put fire back in. But so much has changed between then and now, it is unclear exactly what a healthy future even looks like.
We can't fight it all the time. We have to somehow learn to accommodate it as an inevitable and important force on the landscape that is going to be more and more likely with climate change and with our building pattern.
I think the public is seeing that, and I see some of the agencies starting to realize, well, we also are fighting a losing battle.
It's a system that needs to be retooled and reworked. There is starting to be, for many groups, the understanding that based on the condition of the forest, we do need to do some work. And we just have to come to an agreement on what are those prescriptions that will make a difference.
If the government can't do it all, having room for more than one fire culture makes sense. Ranchers know how to burn. All kinds of landowners in the southeast. Foresters know how to burn. And indigenous people know how to burn. They're not the same, but all of us together can help bring fire back into balance.
If we think to re-engage around the tribal side of it, we can reconnect people to landscapes that they haven't been able to steward in a long time, and help to heal those communities, but also help to heal the land and the ecosystems on that land. And it's not just an exclusive indigenous thing, but it's bringing everybody along in that process too.